Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Bridge, Connecting the Futures of Work and Education, Harappa Education's inaugural annual conference that brings together for the first time India's academics and industry leaders on a single platform to foster the most crucial conversations on education and work. For the benefit of audience members joining us for the first time today, we have 3 tracks that will run in parallel at Bridge. Links to move to each of these tracks will be shared with you in the chat when appropriate. I am Nikhil Gambhir, Vice President, Engagement and Customer Success at Harappa, and your host for track 1, which is the College Workplace Continuum. This track will focus on how to make our graduates thrive and not just survive. Track 2 is the Art and Science of Learning, which will be hosted by Vipul Rathore, Chief Content Officer at Harappa. This track will take converging principles from psychology, cognitive science, and behavioral science to reimagine learning impact. Track 3 is the Education Enterprise, which will be hosted by Seema Chaudhary, Vice President of Curriculums and Programs at Harappa. This track will focus on intentional partnerships that can be forged between academia and industry to make a dent in the education employability challenge. The sessions at Bridge will happen in 6 different formats, which will be the keynote, the masterclass, the huddle, the encounter, the colloquy, and the solution room. We had a fascinating day 1 at Bridge yesterday, which we captured in graphic recordings, and I would like to take a few minutes to walk all of you through some of these. I would especially like to thank Santosh Nair and Ajay Gupta from Clouds and Arrows, as well as Sneha Ignale for capturing our sessions with such insightful artistry. We opened yesterday with a keynote on future-proofing our workforce and closed with a keynote on what a unicorn employee will look like. During the day, we also had an encounter on why our graduates are unemployable, 3 huddles on the changing nature of our workforce post the COVID-19 pandemic, what the new age resume should look like, and what it will take to prepare Gen Z and Gen Alpha for the world of work. In addition, we had 2 masterclasses on how people learn and how higher ed can complement both work and life skills. There was also a solution room on what it will take for us to go from just ed tech to learn tech, and a fascinating colloquy on why edtech companies are now in the spotlight for the world's most discerning investors. Yesterday was truly an intellectual treat. Let me now quickly take you through some of the graphic summaries of each session. Mr. Piramal spoke about the need for deeper collaboration, why people make all the difference, and how agility and data-driven decision-making is the need of the hour. We had the director of IIM Bangalore and the CEO of OYO India speak about how academia and industry can co-create a new age curriculum and learning experience to try and solve the employability challenge our graduates face. In the new age resume, our speakers spoke about the need for the resume to go from being a sequential list of proof of work to being a consequential and distinctive story of growth, learning, and experiences. Julie Dirkson's masterclass was all about how we can build a framework to assess complex social, cognitive, and behavioral skills that are going to become even more critical for workplace success. The colloquy with EdTech investors focused on how startups can make India an EdTech hub by scaling learner impact and focusing on the right North Star metrics in order to solve the challenge of making quality education accessible and affordable to the masses. The closing keynote by Mr. Narasimhan was a riveting session on what it will take to make a true employee unicorn. He spoke about his 20 courses, 20 experiences over 20 years, all geared towards building new competencies in this fast-changing world of work. Today's sessions are going to be just as exciting and insightful, and here's the agenda for the day. The sessions are going to run across our 3 tracks, and the links for the same will be posted in the chat at the appropriate time. Like yesterday, you can continue to engage with our speakers by posting questions and commenting on our reflection wall. We will have 2 breaks during the day in between these powerful conversations to give you some time to grab some tea, coffee, and a snack. With that, I would now like to introduce the opening keynote for day 2, Philanthropy, Legacy, and Impact by Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla. The keynote will be moderated by Dr. Pramath Raj Sinha, founder and chairman, Harappa Education. Please give us a few minutes while we have Dr. Sinha and Mr. Birla join in. Hi, Pramath. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nikhil.
Over to you for the opening keynote.
Okay, thank you so much, Nikhil. I'm delighted today to start with our opening keynote on our very important day 2 of this event. The opening keynote is entitled Philanthropy, Legacy, and Impact. When we were setting up the conference, we were thinking about this whole issue of employability that we've been talking about over the last 2 days, but we were also thinking about the role of education and the role of the employer. And in that, one could not ignore the role of philanthropy in setting up high quality educational institutions in India. I have been personally involved in a few of those. These are institutions that were really inspired by a bunch of people who gave their wealth away, who wanted to leave a legacy, but not just that, not just create a name, but also have impact on the country and society. And so we wanted to have a vibrant session on that topic because it's such a big part of high quality education in India, and there couldn't be anyone better than Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla to anchor this opening keynote for us. I'm delighted that he is here with us today, and I will be having a conversation with him about philanthropy, legacy, and impact. I just want to remind everyone again that you can please post your questions in the Q&A box, and we also have a reflection wall that you can write your contributions to. Quickly introducing Mr. Birla. Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla is, as you all know, the chairman of the Aditya Birla Group. I'm not going to go into the description of his business interests, but you know that this is one of the largest Indian conglomerates and probably the most global of our Indian companies in terms of its reach across the world. I would like to just mention that Mr. Birla is, of course, very involved in education. He's the chancellor of the BITS Pilani University, which is now an institution of eminence in our country. In fact, it was the very first private institution to be endowed with that honor. He's also actually the chairman, and a lot of people don't know this, of IIT Delhi, the Board of Governors, as well as the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And he has recently been involved in the launch of the BITS School of Management, which is already gaining a lot of traction. Mr. Birla has won several awards for his exemplary leadership in both industry and education. Truly privileged to have you today with us, Mr. Birla, and thank you for joining us. I think you're on mute, but I can move forward if...
Sorry about that. I was saying thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Birla. Because we have limited time and I want to hear so much from you, I'm going to go through just a series of questions and then we can have a chat about this whole topic. Obviously, you personally and the group has been so involved in philanthropy, education, but also you are one of the biggest recruiters of talent in this country. And before we move to that point, uh, I would like to understand from you as a recruiter and employer, what are some of the big challenges that you see in appropriately preparing the youth of India for, a bright future that we all obviously want for them?
So, Pramath, I assume that this is from an education point of view, right?
Yes, and if you want to add from a company perspective also, that would be great. But yes, let's start with the education perspective.
So, I think for these really bright kids who join us, whether it's from BITS or IIMs or IITs or any other institute, the biggest challenge, I think, is about translating what they've learned in the classroom to real life. And I always tell them that the pedigree is good for a year, at the most a year and a half, 2 years. Then you're just one among, you're the first among equal, maybe at the best. So I think it's about bringing the real world into the classroom. That seems to be a big challenge. Some schools are better at doing that than others. But I think in general, the pedagogy maybe, or the fact that I just think that the segues between industry and academia are either not there or so weak that real life or real world learning doesn't really happen in the classroom. That I think is the biggest, biggest sort of challenge. Also, I think that our kids sometimes are taught in silos, so cross-functional learning, which, by the way, also includes soft skills like presentation, like communication, like maybe conflict management, managing your own aspirations. None of this is really, maybe it can't be taught in a classic MBA program, but there could be ways of creating awareness about these issues that they would, face in a workplace. So I'd say these two big ones. One is about being the real, about them not being able to hit the ground running in the workplace quite often, because they really don't have a complete holistic view of what, let's say in the case of business, what it really takes to be able to contribute meaningfully. And the second, I think, is the softer skills. I think that schools can do much more on that front.
Do you see any examples, Mr. Birla, across the institutions that you got exposure to of people being able to have done things successfully, even baby steps in these two areas?
So I stepped down from IIT Delhi about a year ago when my term got over. I'm still chairman of IIMA. I think they both done a fair bit. But I also think it's important that, the student takes responsibility. So you have, children kids who will take personal responsibility, make that extra effort, go that extra mile to learn, to connect, to kind of kind of push themselves to go beyond what's taught in the classroom. So there is individual effort, endeavor, enterprise also that counts for a lot.
BITS Pilani does have a very strong, I forget what they call that program, where students are placed into companies. And I think that is probably one attempt to address the first challenge we talked about, right?
So I must say that BITS Pilani, this has been a legacy, I believe, almost from the time of that it started 50 years ago. There is two big chunks in time during which they have what they call practice school.
Yes, that's the word.
Practice time placed in an industry, in a company, and over a period of time, there is an equation built with these companies. So they give fairly substantial work to these kids. And I think that's a great immersion because it's for a prolonged period of time. I think it goes up to 6 months in one stint.
Yes.
They get graded on that. They themselves recognize this as an opportunity to be, part of the real world, learn, grow. I think that, of course, is a very big part that BITS plays in bringing, some sense of reality to its kids.
Hmm.
I think that that's perhaps one of the most unique features of the BITS curriculum.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that not more people in India have adopted that as a pedagogical or a curriculum method, but maybe more on that another day. On the soft skill one, I was just curious to know you did spend time at LBS for your own MBA, and I know that your kids may have also studied in US and other schools. Do you sense that they do a better job abroad of the soft skills aspects? Do you see that in the people you hire or people you've been
You know,
exposed to?
I always say that my MBA has run its life because I did my MBA about 30 years ago.
Yes.
But the most memorable course was one on exactly this soft skills, where they kind of record you having to give feedback to a subordinate, having to chair a meeting when someone is blocking you. And I really thought that when I look back, that's one course that, in fact, is the most memorable from my point of view. So something to be said about, but that was about it. At that point in time, even that seemed like a lot.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that universities or schools abroad do better on that front. No.
Okay. Now, moving to the point about legacy, Mr. Birla, the Birla Group has created an amazing legacy in education in India over the years. Can you tell us about the origins and the motivations and how you, as the group chairman, now sees yourself sustaining this legacy over time?
So I must say that it's a family legacy, Pramath, more than just a legacy of the Aditya Birla Group. Our forefathers actually started this contribution to the space of education, I think, in a very long time ago. Don't remember, maybe 1950 or something, 1950. Um, I think it's about giving back to society. That's been a very integral part of what we are as a family. That's a very sort of embedded part of our DNA. So, not something that the family likes to talk about. In fact, I've tried in the past, some of us, relatively younger people in the family, that we should, document all that's been done in terms of not just education, but there's so much in terms of institution building of different kinds, temples, so on and so forth. But there doesn't seem to be that desire to do that. So, we keep hearing about Gupt Dani, which means that you don't really talk about contributing to the social field and giving back to society. So I think there's no real desire to create a legacy on that front, to be honest. But of course, people do get to know. I mean, you can't put up so many schools and not people not know about them. I think that it's about the fact that education, as you know better, is such a great leveler. And in a highly stratified society like we have in India, that's a very powerful, it's a very powerful way of bridging gaps. So the incremental impact it can have, the scale of impact it can have on society is just so huge
Yeah.
that it makes it a very compelling cause to support. And I think that basically is the underlying philosophy or the desire to support education. It's not just about bits. It's a lot of schools. So the group itself has 50 schools. We have 50,000 kids. A big bunch of which is from the more marginal sections of society. So I think it's that basic philosophy, the fact that it can really move the needle.
In that sense, I do sense that you all don't like to talk about it too much, but I also see a lot more people wanting to contribute, and is that a trend that you see, that people are sort of, we've got many unicorns getting built and people becoming wealthy. Is there a way to inspire people to do more of this, or do you think this is something that will just happen naturally and we should let that happen, given the need for education and the impact it can have, as you have rightly just pointed out?
I think people who have a basic inclination, whether it's some of the people behind the recent unicorns or other people, they kind of gravitate towards the causes that they feel about. If there is that desire to give back, I don't think it really requires any kind of coaching or inspiration. I mean, inspiration, you don't need to do a lot to feel inspired. It's something that comes from within, is my belief. And I think that in particular in the generation after ours, the desire to give back in any way, for example, environment is such a big issue with school going and college going kids now. Veganism, for example, so it doesn't have to be charity, but in their mind, they're helping to build a better world or, a greener society or greener earth, whatever it is. But this desire to give something back and do your bit is very heartening to see is so strong in the next generation.
Yeah, we have done some research on the next generation and what they are looking for in employers, even not from just an entrepreneurship perspective. And I think that's one of the things that's coming out is that people want to work with companies and for brands that demonstrate those types of values. Moving along to BitSong, it's an exciting new launch. And what was the motivation behind setting up a new institution, and that too with a focus on management education? People could argue that there's enough and more of management education in this country.
So I think for those who are watching this, it's important that I give the context. Pramath has been very deeply engaged in the creation of BitSong along with me more as from the perspective of bits. Pramath has created the entire curriculum all by himself almost, which by the way incorporates a lot of these softer skills. A very interesting program, very sort of unique, not just in India, but I think even globally from whatever I know. So I think BITS, Pramath, going to your point about a new field of education, BITS started off as a technical and science institute, but isn't sort of committed to do only that. It's basically about imparting education.
Yeah.
So we have 4 campuses. All of those about a year and a half ago got full up. So we have about 16,000 children, students on campus, and many more in distance programs. And I felt this is the right time to foray into another field of education. Being an MBA myself and having been a practitioner of management fairly long now, there are many schools of management, but I think the really good ones are very few and far between, especially a country of our size and a country of India's demographic sort of profile, where we say that our demography is a huge comparative advantage going forward. That can only happen if people have the right skills. I think that basically has been the motivation. For BITS, it's another line of education that sort of is crying out in some ways for a bigger contribution. And BITS being the brand that it is, that's been built over decades, seemed very ideally poised to contribute by creating a management school.
Okay. Yeah, I think we still need so many quality institutions in India. We do seem to have lots of quantity, but I think
it's about the quality. We have, like you would know better, I mean, we have a spattering of management schools all over the country of all shapes and sizes. But the really good ones, like I was saying, I think are very few and far between.
Yeah. And would you? There's a question from the audience. Arti Seth is asking: would that mean that there should be an overhaul in the pedagogy and assessment being imparted in all B schools in India? Do you feel that management education in general needs to change, given that you are also an employer of a large number of these?
I think that I'm not an educator, obviously, but I think that what must happen is that we must create much stronger linkages between industry and academia. If industry is the biggest sort of, biggest kind of consuming segment of children, well, let's say engineers or MBAs, I think creating that much stronger segue will make education so much more real. Would be great for both industry, from my perspective, and also for the children who are joining. So I don't know about assessment and all of that, but just creating ways and innovation around making the connect with industry much stronger. Whilst these students are in school for 2 years or 4 years, I'm sure there are ways to do that. That I think would be one big sort of leap forward if we can do that in a sort of a neat way.
We'll come back to some more questions as we go along. But do you, as a group, have plans to increase philanthropy and expand the presence in the education space? Bitsom seems to be more an extension of BITS Pilani, but is there a plan to do something larger and bigger?
The philanthropy is my mother looks after the it's called the Aditya Birla Center for Community and Rural Initiatives. And the big focus is on communities around the establishments where we exist. Most of those are in the backward beyond. And the philosophy there, or the overarching objective, is to look at the critical issues faced by communities around these establishments and try and kind of target or kind of resolve those. So that actually differs from place to place. There are some common themes, for example, water, for example, self-help groups, but you would have, cases in Uttar Pradesh where you have very young widows, and they would address as sensitive an issue socially as widow remarriage, where they essentially have to bring on board the parents, the panchayat, the in-laws. So they take up some really tough issues as well, and issues that they believe will make an impact in the communities in which we are operating. So some common themes that run across, and some themes that are specific to the communities where we are. About expanding philanthropy, it's very much a part of doing business. So it's run with the same rigor that we run our businesses. You have external assessment, impact studies. There's a whole parallel organization, of course, a much smaller one, but a very competent and committed one that does this, 24/7. And it's something that has only increased year on year. It's about a deep belief that giving back is a very integral part of existing as a business. So it's not just about, we don't think of it as philanthropy. It would be called philanthropy in the classic sense, but it's just about, let's say, talking more from the context of inclusion, let's say. I think that probably would be the best that I can describe it.
You're almost challenging the sequence with which we labeled this as philanthropy, legacy, impact, and you're saying it's actually all starts with impact, and that impact is inclusion that you're trying to drive, whether it is through education, whether it is through community building, and that's a very powerful way of looking at it, I think.
So, Pramath, even if I should say so, my great-grandfather, G.D. Birla, had a very close association with Mahatma Gandhi, and that sort of percolated down the generations. So there is this whole concept of trusteeship, which means that you're managing, let's say, assets, industries, business in trust for someone, which is society. So if that is a philosophy, a principle that is so embedded in the psyche of all of us, then I think giving back is a very natural extension of the businesses that we're running. It's not something that we see as being exceptional.
I've heard this word before, but I'm hearing it again after a long time, and I think it's important for the audience to truly appreciate that word. It's a beautiful concept. Can you talk a little bit more about
it? It's about being a trustee as opposed to being an owner. You exist. I think it's about. So we talk about ESG now, for example. I think this is a concept that goes back almost from the time of the origin of our family, where social responsibility is what we call it now, corporate social responsibility, that I think would be the right way to describe it. So I don't think that it's really looked on as a very big deal. Reaching out to communities, integrating them into mainstream society. So of course it's philanthropy, but I don't think that there is a great sense of us doing something exceptional. It's very much a part of what you should be doing as a trustee. Uh, that essentially is, which is why also the family doesn't like to talk about it, because in their mind, in their psyche, it's not really something that's truly exceptional. It's something that's very much a part of what you should be doing.
Right.
Uh,
It's interesting because as you were talking about this, I was picking up a few questions. There's somebody who's joined us from outside India, Dariana Osnato, and we also have somebody else who asked a similar question earlier. I think it was, I'm trying to get the name here, but the idea was, do we have to be a large corporate, or do we have to be a billionaire or a large wealthy person to be actually doing this kind of contribution to society? And do you have any thoughts on that? How can
no, I don't.
everyone be focused on doing their bit?
I think there are so many examples of India now, where people have come together in some way, some form of crowdfunding or crowdsourcing, whatever you might call it, and created some very powerful institutions um, for the sake of charity, philanthropy, and that seems to be something that is catching on in India. You have, there are so many BITS alumni uh, who believe so much in giving back. I wish they'd give back more to their own alma mater, to be really honest, but they have a great sense that they want to give back to the world.
Sure.
I don't think you need to be a billionaire. I think that's a concept that's now run its life. You find people from all sections of society who very often come together, people who don't even know each other, but maybe there's one common thread, one common sort of acquaintance who brings people together, to create something that's truly substantial.
No, thank you. And Shweta Singh was the other person who had said, how can we all do our bit for a better India as a common man? And I think Shweta, Mr. Birla has really answered your question there. We are winding down, and I think you've touched upon this, but this is a question that we did have where you might want to leave us with some parting thoughts. What would be the key lessons that you would want to pass on to others who want to set up educational institutions or leave, well, I wouldn't say legacy, but at least make an impact in the field of education? Any lessons there from the work that you've done with schools?
I really don't feel qualified enough to give a lesson, but I would think that the different parts of the value chain in the field of education, to me, the sort of the what is required in each part is very different. Primary part requires something very different, but in terms of, let's say, post-grad education, I still think the biggest impact would come from creating these bridges. Maybe not just industry, but research institutes globally, think tanks globally. How do you create stronger linkages so that there is a cross flow of an interchange of ideas, thoughts, thought leadership? How do you bring together maybe MBA schools or engineering schools across the country to work, concomitantly, as opposed to being, in a sense, competing for the same pool of students? So there's a lot to be said about collaboration, in short.
That's a very powerful thought. In a way, you've extended our own vision of this conference, which we call the bridge, where we're thinking about the bridge between employers and educators. But you're saying that, hey, there's many more bridges to be built.
Absolutely. I think that that is one part of the equation that we don't seem to be getting right. It can't be so difficult. I'm sure that it requires just some deep thinking and reaching out to different people who think alike from different parts of society.
Yeah, I think we may have become too insular in our own areas and not really worked. Last question on this bridge bit, because Kanika Singhal asks an interesting question, that you've spoken about Gupt Dan and you've spoken about trusteeship, both very Indian concepts. Yet we seem to be very inspired by Western models in education. So do you think we should be also bridging, I'm using that word, bridging to models from our past, inspired by Indian philosophy, scriptures, have those lost relevance, or we just don't understand them enough to innovate around them and bring them into our education system? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's very important for education to be very contemporary and real, like I keep saying. Contemporary, I think, is the right word. I'm not sure if we can borrow from our scriptures. I mean, that can be by way of, additional information, additional education for children, students who want to know more about it. I don't think they can form the basis of education in India, because I think that, each kind of period of history, each period in a nation's evolution requires different solutions, and that should be the case with education as well. Having said that, I know there's a very interesting course that you have curated for Bitsom that talks about harking back to Indian scriptures and what can be learned from there for managers and leaders of today.
Sure.
But I don't think you can base an entire curriculum around that, for example.
Thank you. That's very insightful also, and I'm so grateful that you could spare the time. I know you have a busy day and that you had to travel today, so I'm really grateful personally for that you made the time.
It's been a pleasure, Pramath, and I hope it's at least a little helpful for people who joined on this.
No, we have a very carefully invited audience of people, and they were all waiting for this session, and there couldn't be a better start to our day 2. So thank you for spending so much time, and everything you said has tremendous learning for all of us. So thank you very, very much.
And congratulations for all the good work that you're doing in a very silent way, in a Gupt way again, a very similar kind of thing that you're doing.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.